One thing I would like to ask is if anybody has any questions during the presentation, please ask. I want to make this interactive. Then this next session is more educational than discussing any particular technology or anything from that perspective. It's more of kind of aligning in terms of people's understanding of what cybersecurity is and how to implement it within an organization in the most effective manner possible. So my name is Richard Foltak. I am Dido's CISO. Basically, I'm a senior VP, head of cloud here at Dido. I've been with the company for the last 3.5 years, helping build out their cloud practice. Prior to this, I was chief architect at Deloitte Consulting for 5 years. I helped build out their AWS, GCP, and Azure practice as well. Then many years at Verizon Data, I was their distinguished architect running their network aspect of their organization, so 8 data centers and a migration to cloud. And then 17 years at Cisco, where I was a distinguished architect and technical leader, senior technical leader, building out, developing their security solutions within their iOS and operating systems in their environment. A few more years before that at Nortel. Basically, I've been in this industry for a long time. I have the scars and the stories to, talk about, some of which have never been published because, well, people would get upset with me, but sometimes I do like sharing them. So you might get some stories out of me during the course of this in terms of how the world really operates. John, can you move to the next slide? So we're going to basically talk about an introduction so we can align everybody on what cybersecurity is, and then kind of get into the nuts and bolts of the evolving threat landscape and how organizations could essentially deal with that. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so let's kind of just get the definition out of the way, right? Cybersecurity is the practice of protecting systems, networks, programs, and data from digital attacks and unauthorized access. Now that sounds, how should I put it, rather coarse in terms of capability, but it really gets into the fact that it encompasses the technologies, the processes, the practices that are there to design to safeguard that information. And its real goal, and you get down to the core of what security is about ensuring the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data systems. So that means, one, people who shouldn't have access to data are not getting access to that. Data itself is protected. In other words, no one alters the data, messes with that data. And finally, your systems are always on. They're available to meet your business requirements. And this is sort of very, very key here, is when you start looking at the responsibilities of what cybersecurity covers, it covers pretty much every aspect of your organization. And why that also kind of aligns to, because as a leadership organization, if you look at how strategy is built within an organization, I put that on the bottom right-hand side, right? You have organizational goals. What is the purpose? What is your vision? What are you as an organization meant to do? And then it comes in with another set of requirements, is like, how am I supposed to protect this data, as a different set of requirements to come in? So you define a set of strategies. And then, of course, there's that old adage, culture eats strategy for breakfast. What that means is your strategy doesn't have an iota of a chance of being successful unless your culture is aligned to satisfying that. And I don't care what technology you put in front of it, what processes you have, if your people and your structures are not designed to essentially provide the right culture to get something done, you're going to have it's going to become a misfit of an organization, because a lot of people have great ideas. We have this strategy. We wanted to get stuff done. But let's face it, if you don't have the budget, you obviously don't have the structure. If you don't have the right people to get stuff done, you're not going to be successful in getting that organizational outcomes that you're striving to get at. And I'm really kind of hyper focusing on this because it ties right back to cybersecurity. Every aspect of how you hire people, how you train people, how you develop a culture within your organization is going to become critical, not only for cybersecurity, by the way, it deals with most programs, most projects, but I want to be very clear about this. There's no magic bullet that you buy some tool from SAP or some other aspect that you're going to miraculously solve your organizational problems because you bought one like you've solved for technology. And in the cyber world, this is so key, and we will kind of get into this as we go further down. One other aspect to understand, like when you look at what cybersecurity is, it's all about risk mitigation, risk management. It's a foundational aspect of that combination of technology, people, process, and structure. And how do I minimize the risk of stuff going horribly bad for me? And it's really a mathematical equation. What's the threat probability of something, something happened bad based on vulnerability of my system? And also, what is the value of that asset that I'm protecting? And I want to be very clear about this. There is no point whatsoever to spend $1,000 to protect a $20 bill. And if you talk to technologists, and I come from that world, and they don't like hearing this. A lot of security guys grow up in security tools, and they're saying, they want to just secure everything but you're not going to spend $1,000 to protect the $20 bill. It's really important to this. Now, the fact that that $20 bill was stolen from you, would that cause reputational damage? And maybe it's worth more, right? You got to answer those questions for yourself. But I wanted to kind of identify the fact that the asset value and the value of something is objective, right? It's not an actual, or subjective, sorry. It's not really based on that if you're a county, all of the homeowners or property records or something to that effect, you can look at this and say, well, it's public information, it's free. Is it? What if someone tampers with it? What if someone messes up with that? What is the true value of the data you're trying to protect? It's just something I'm just kind of calling out, that you have to really know how to assess what it is that you're protecting and assign a certain value to it. And then look at the threat of what happens when someone messes with that. What happens with, the vulnerability to the system, and look at it like, I'm going to kind of get into your sort of world. There was a time, what was it, in 2008 financial crisis, where mortgages were essentially being managed on an Excel spreadsheet and being passed around by a master spreadsheet. And people typed the wrong address, and you had foreclosures on the wrong address because the data got compromised. I mean, and then even though they filed the deed to the county, oftentimes the mortgage financial companies shredded their documents, their paper documents. It gets stupid if you read into that and see what happens. But there's risk there, right? There's inherent risk that happens because it's not just the technology that was poorly selected for the situation, but the processes almost look like there was criminal shredding taking place on an environment to try to make sure there's no paper trail of bad deeds that were taking place. Again, calling this out because it's a real world. And by the way, today, 2 weeks ago, the first time the SEC has formally charged criminal charges to a CISO for failing to do their due diligence and due care. What that means, they did not protect their systems accurately, and they are ultimately the ones responsible for protecting their ecosystem. And this is something that in the world of cybersecurity, or even in organizational management, you have to be aware of. That the job for cybersecurity is what they refer to as mitigate, reduce the risk of something going down as much as possible to the level acceptable by senior leadership. There's no way to eliminate all risk. Anybody who says, and I'm not poo-pooing Google or anyone else, but anybody who says, I'm just going to move all my risk and give it to Google, you've transferred the risk. You haven't eliminated it. Right now, Google says I could reduce it to something so small you won't notice it. That's great. But you are still ultimately responsible for where your data lives, how you support your customers, where stuff happens, as an executive, as a leadership individual. And in the world we live on today, you could also be criminally responsible for making poor choices in how you do certain things, because there is this legal concept that says, did I do my due diligence? This basically means, did I do my homework? Did I look into what's going on? Do I understand what's happening? And then based on that, I did my due care. I did the job that I was supposed to do to protect my constituents' data, their privacy, their whatever it is that your cybersecurity requirements are. I did do my job. And if you cannot demonstrate that, you cannot basically produce that information to someone from a leadership perspective, you got big problems. And I'm talking at an individual level, not as an organization. Organizations have the risks that we kind of document there in terms of impact, right? You could have financial loss, you could have reputational damage, you could have operational disruptions. People don't understand that a snowstorm, okay? You would think, okay, what's a snowstorm have to do with cybersecurity? Everything, because a snowstorm triggers what is referred to as a disaster. And by a disaster means if no one could come into the office, no one could come into work, are you still providing service to your constituents? Are you down? Are you effectively not providing services? So there's this thing called disaster recovery, which has to be built into your operating processes on how you manage disasters. And disasters could be any type of disasters, right? Environmental, the weather. It could be war. It could be sabotage. It could be other aspects. And these are things you have to start building into your mindset, because any one of these activities could potentially disrupt your operations and therefore disrupt your ability to deliver services that you are duty bound to support. Anyway, just want to kind of close there. Obviously, intellectual property loss, customer impact, crisis management costs, and then competitive edge, the loss of that. Just wanted to kind of cover this right off the bat, so people could understand what is the role of cybersecurity. And it is all encompassing, and it is not just, did you choose the right technology? Any questions? John, can you move to the next slide? So let's talk about the actual threats, right? Back to the whole risk conversation. Is that you had the threat times the probability of, or how many vulnerabilities you have to your thing, plus the asset value. There is a considerable amount of threat in the world we live in today, right? We have sophisticated cyber attacks that come in there and find ways to enter into your system. In fact, there's an organization called Mitri that actually has mapped out all the known vulnerabilities in the attack vectors that are out there. So people talk about, they look at it from an attack perspective, saying, how vulnerable am I based on all these various ways of attacking my environment? And then they kind of do a sort of attack focused way of looking at your environment and saying, how vulnerable am I? And please be aware that most organizations, if they were just to be attacked based on documented CVEs, which was mentioned a little earlier, it's these known, actually that was a different presentation, my apologies. There's CVEs, this documented vulnerability that is captured by the cybersecurity world and then made an announcement saying, hey guys, be aware that Kerberos, which is a authentication feature inside of Microsoft Windows, and we found a vulnerability in there, and then someone could exploit it or something to that effect. Please be aware, people are going to exploit it. Doesn't mean your system is going to be exploited, but it's there. Ransomware, you guys are well aware of this. This is in the news all the time. People are coming in, they're locking down your environments, and they're trying to extract money. So criminals are using these sophisticated cyber attacks to try to monetize the fact that you've not made a sufficient level of protection of your infrastructure. There's supply chain vulnerabilities. SolarWinds is a good example of this. So you're buying software that you're embedding into your own application, security software as well, and they get hacked, and they got breached, and that hack translates and converts back to you. So I'm just pointing out, when you look at it from a cybersecurity perspective, everything from the USB drive that someone could plug into your computer to the browser to where people surf on the internet can lead to a vulnerability being exploited and someone adding a Trojan and getting access to your system. IoT devices, and I'm going to say something that people don't want to hear, but most times software is built and security is attached after the fact. And this happens. I'm pointing this out. So in 2017, I actually was a keynote speaker at Palo Alto's Ignite 2017. And I was at Verizon at the time. And, it was third day. I walked the halls. If you guys have ever done this, so during a conference, looked at the various solution technologies, and I called it out. I went in and I said, look, my problem today, we had new technologies at the time called Kubernetes and or Pivotal Cloud Foundry. These were PaaS solutions that you install to manage applications differently. 95% of all my new applications that were being developed at Verizon at the time were using PaaS solutions. None of them were running on VMs. Yet I'm going to the most sophisticated cybersecurity sort of vendor day out there during the time, and not one person had a solution on how to protect my containers, my workloads at the time. And I called it out. I go, you guys are doing a great job solving my problems from last decade. I need solutions today, because the software folks are not building it into their solutions. They are not doing it into the IoT devices. So these are vulnerable areas where people can come in and cause disruptions. So how are you protecting yourself from it? What are you doing to engage with that? AI-powered threats. So a few weeks ago, I was at MWise, which is Mandiant, a Google technology vendor, and they called out something really, really hilarious there was let's just say, an attack that was successful. And it was successful because the way the tools today scan vulnerabilities is they actually look for the word CVE. Why? Because hackers are very nice. They comment how they're hacking your system. They go, this thing will use CVE threat to get into your system by installing this and then doing this and then doing that. Well, some hacker was very cute, and he went in and changed it and says, I'm installing puppies on the system. Puppies are good. And the AI tool that went in and did the first set of scanning to verify that agreed. Again, because it's a large language model. You're convincing an AI verbally, not technologically. It did see what it was doing, but it said, hey, installing puppies on my system is a good idea. So I'm just pointing out that the threat actors are aware of the or let's just say the weaknesses associated to some of the tooling out there, and it's a constant arms race. Be aware that you can't just focus on the tools. You've got to focus on the people and understanding and training them right to know what they should and shouldn't do, right? Phishing attacks, emails, don't press on this link. I think we've all heard these particular aspects. Why? Because you're going to get stuff installed on your computer that you should not have on there. Social engineering, we're all aware of this, right? Someone calls you up and says, hey, I'm an employee at your company and my computer is not on. Can I get access from this or that? Or they try to verbally get access to your system because they looked you up on LinkedIn or on Facebook because you advertised it. You work for your agency, you work for your organization, and you told me what your mother's maiden name is, you know what all the kids are, all your security questions have been a sort of shared from a social engineering perspective, and people are able to get access as you into the system. This happens even to this day. There's stories all you have to do is just pay attention, and people talk about how this is happening. Even worse, I'm going to tell you, there's also a generational issue going on today. Social activism, right? You see the folks right now think it's perfectly okay, like when they're talking about stop oil. So they're going around and destroying works of art to get themselves advertised. You have a generation of people who may not agree with political decisions your county, your organization, your thing is doing, and they could do damage to your system just because someone got to their head and said, you should do something about, it's like, your job is not to be political. Your job is to deliver services. But it's amazing how certain people think it's like they're being, I won't say brainwashed, they're being driven to do stuff that it's not necessarily in their best interest. So you look at the WikiLeaks leak, right? And I'm not going to say whether it was right or wrong that this information was shared, but the reality is that was a vulnerability. That was an employee who took the fact that they had access to information, and I understand why they may felt that information should be shared. But the reality is that was not within his role. He shouldn't be sharing data he's not allowed to share with. I'm just saying, as an organization, otherwise things fall apart. And you have to be aware that these are real threats, and why hiring the right people, making sure that they have only the access they need, and even then, making sure like some people with elevated access, are they being watched? Are you watching for stuff that shouldn't be happening? Is that within your purview? Things you need to be aware of. Regulatory compliance. Oh, this is a doozy. Okay, so you guys have all heard of GDPR, right, in Europe, which is for your protection, we've got to protect your privacy. But the reality is there's huge fines that are associated with that. California has CCAP, I believe. It's an equivalent one where you as an individual with information in California or records in California, if you hold on to data for a Californian resident, California could come after you for a breach of data that involved one of their residents. And it's a tax grab in many ways, because if there's a breach, or even if you're violating their rules, but you're holding on to data of one of their individuals, you are putting yourself at risk. You've got emerging technologies, right? New tools that are coming out. AI is obviously was mentioned, but there are other tools that are coming out that could introduce new risks to your environment. And finally, the biggest of all is the nation state attacks. If you ask yourself, why did Google do what it did? It's because the Chinese government hacked Google. So they rethought security from the ground up, and they said, okay, how do we do this differently? How do we protect ourselves? And it's not about completely eliminating risk, because the nation states have attacks that you don't even want, we're not going to discuss, okay? If they want to take systems down, they can. So let me, I know I saw some smiles on the faces in terms of that. So let me be clear. There's a service, there's a feature by our government after 2001, after the terrorist attacks, that calls it lawful intercept. The US government has the right to tap into all your IP traffic at any time by sending what they refer to as an SNMP message to basically says, I want to tap this user, whether you have DSL, cable, or fast G internet, the NSA can tap into all your communication flows. Also know that the NSA provides all the vendors the crypto libraries they use to encrypt your communication. So if you think the government can't see what you're doing, you're fooling yourself. I'm just letting you know, right? And it's like, these, by the way, are required for Cisco to do an export license. If Cisco sells a router to a country like England or someone else, to be able to get that export license, those libraries are built into the products. Now, as a result, ask yourself, are there backdoors to these systems? I don't know. I never saw them. I'm just pointing out, but if they're telling you you must install the software in your system, there's a reason. And I'm just pointing out that the sophistication of the nation state attackers are at a completely higher level than the criminal element. So you need to be aware that these threats exist. I'm not trying to scare people. Look, things are running, things are good, but you can't ignore it, is really what it comes down to. And anyway, let's kind of move on to the next slide. So how do you deal with this? Okay, and it's like, as an organization, how do you deal with threats? Now, you don't need to start from nothing. Okay, there are practices out there that have already been built called cybersecurity frameworks, right? They're saying, here's a checklist of what you should do step by step to operate a cybersecurity framework within your organization. And there's a bunch of organizations that have built custom solutions depending on the need, on what it is that you're trying to do. But the most popular one within the United States is NIST, which is National Institute of Standards and Technology. And they keep up. They keep up with the new emerging changes that are occurring in the environment. And they're looking at other cybersecurity framework, like ISO is a European-based one. HITRUST is a healthcare-driven sort of cybersecurity framework. COBIT is built around architecture of enterprises and so forth. CSA is what I refer to as the everything in the kitchen sink cybersecurity framework, because what they've done is taken all the other cybersecurity frameworks and created a mapping and said, this is sort of like what you should be doing. PCI is a credit card industry one. SOC 2 is mostly for public companies that want to demonstrate their cybersecurity presence. Just be aware these things exist, so you don't have to reinvent the what should I do from scratch. And this is very, very important, because there are people working in these bodies, and there, a lot of corporations like Google work with these bodies to help drive these standards. Now, when you look at what the standards cover, it's a lot. Access control. Who should have access to what information? Awareness and training. We've mentioned this. This is a core piece and an area where many organizations are struggling with. Audit and accountability, basically tracking. Do I have the ability to identify everything an employee has done in my environment? Configuration management. I know personally, because of my time at Deloitte, of 3 very, very large organizations today that are financial banks that are paying $150 million a year fine yearly because they cannot demonstrate how their current version of software is at this version while their change management system says it's on another. And they get audited yearly to verify that all their compliance changes are in place. And the fact is that their inability to organize and control how they configure and set their standards in the organization is hurting them financially, yet they feel it's cheaper not to fix it. So identification and authentication, verifying who you are, what are you going to do? Incidents response. If something happens, are you organized to essentially handle it? Do you have a maintenance organization, right? Media protection. Are you protecting the backups, your storage, where this stuff happens? Personnel security, right? Are you protecting your employees? Do they have a badge? Are they able to come in? What type of security guarantees do you need to provide for your employees, right? And then you have physical and environmental protection. Your data center, is it in a protected area that has, very restricted access? Can people go in there and manage them? Do you have an effective risk assessment practice in your organization? Are you doing this? Now, I'm putting a lot of stuff in here, and we'll kind of get into, because I know a lot of people are going to say, we can't do this, and we'll kind of describe why this is relevant. So it kind of goes into the whole aspect of, do you have a good program management, supply chain risk management, privacy? What are you doing there? Security control frameworks and wireless security. This is all the components surrounding NIST 853. And I'm willing to bet there's going to be a new one that's going to pop in there based on AI in the next few years, just because of the way the world is kind of navigating. Can we go to the next slide? So why are there benefits? Why are organizations adapting this? And this is really about, back to what we were talking about, the senior leadership's criminal risk for not demonstrating their due diligence and their due care. These cybersecurity frameworks are telling you what you should do. And so imagine you just bought yourself a new car. And I think we all know that, every so often you need to go and get it serviced, right? You got to get the oil changed. You got to go in and check your spark plugs, or do this or do that. What do you think is going to happen if you don't do that? What if you don't change your tires and they become bald, and then what happens when you get yourself into an accident and then potentially cause physical harm to somebody else? You've put yourself into the possibility of criminal negligence into your environment. And so this is why we kind of mentioned the fact that by following a blueprint of standards. And by the way, we're not talking about where you need to be on that journey. Just showing that you are attempting to follow this set of standards gets you into a much better, much better state if something were to happen and an investigation basically took out. Because I'm going to tell you right off the bat, you can never eliminate risk to zero. So this adage, you can do everything right and it still goes horribly wrong. Please be aware of this. I think a lot of people think that if I do everything right, things will always work out. Well, life isn't like that. I'm sure most of us understand that. So be aware that, hey, this is where the enhanced security measures come in and they demonstrate that. And you have immediate alignment with industry best practices and strong management, people, process, and technology management around your environment. So this is the great sort of like, hey, here's the set of rules you need to kind of go with. But from a risk management perspective, right, this is really cool, is it tells you that you're prepared for what happens when disaster strikes. Because stuff happens. Like I said, snowstorms happen. I live in Florida, we get hurricanes. It's to not prepare for a hurricane while you live in Florida is foolish, right? California has earthquakes. Every place you have, there's certain things that are going to happen. You should have at least a plan on what are you going to do around that. And in this case, what they're asking for is, can you document it? And can you test it? And it could be something as silly as, testing how employees are dealing with a chat or a message saying, hey, can you go buy an Apple card and send me that information? Why? Because someone could be spoofing or pretending to be somebody else and have you spend money that they shouldn't, right? These are phishing attacks. You should be doing some level of testing around that. And why using one of those cybersecurity frameworks is it's easy, if necessary, to have a third-party auditor come in and attest your compliance. Sometimes it's necessary, sometimes it's not. But at least it's the ability of reducing the risk and the legal repercussions that are associated with, I didn't know I needed to do that. And this is kind of important. It's like, yeah, in some level or another, you need to know what best practices are and at least do some minimum requirements associated with that. But I think the biggest key is the steps that are documented there really goes about establishing a robust security culture within your organization. As I said before, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And if you can just get everyone to be security focused and teach them what that means, you can be way ahead of the curve in terms of preventing and being adaptable to new technologies and evolving threats. So this is where we're like, constantly having knowledge sessions or learning sessions, or you're just talking about certain threats that are out there. Let me give you one example, a small little change. You can do this with Microsoft Office. You can do this with Workspace. There's a feature called MFA, multi-factor authentication, or 2FA, which basically says username and passwords aren't good enough to verify your credentials. We need something else. And what do we mean by that? We need you to have a Google, either SMS or a Google Authenticator or a Microsoft Authenticator app running on an iPhone, on your phone, so you can check that, yes, I have, not only do I know the password, but I have something that ties me to this account. And that combination reduces the risk of someone stealing identity by over 99%. And when you look at the overall threat, most attacks are still someone stealing your credentials. Because I hate to say it, but most of your username and passwords, they're out there. They're in the dark web. People know your credentials because all it takes is one account, one environment that those credentials are stolen. And I will bet that at least half of you on this call here are reusing your password across multiple places. And now, why is this relevant? Because if you have MFA or 2FA as a solution, it doesn't matter if you do. You have a secondary factor that's on your phone that will say the combination of the two will protect my environment. And being able to think that way, being able to know that, hey, I need to protect my environment. I, for a fact, will not work with any institution, like financial institution or so forth, that doesn't support some level of a 2FA in my environment, because they're demonstrating that they're not providing the right level of protection so that somebody can maybe, log into my bank account and wire money somewhere else. I understand that, there's more steps involved, but it's really important to protect access of just divulging how much money I have in the bank account. Shouldn't be someone who gets my Gmail account and some password be able to then access my information. Moving on. So I wanted to call out like implementation. What does it take to implement the CSF in your organization? And it really comes down to culture, because there is a resistance to change. And there's obviously technical debt because you've built stuff without doing something. There's a lack of resources, right? A lot of organizations, and I'm going to kind of throw back into like why a lot of organizations are moving to something like Workspace. It's because they have a lot of technical debt. They have the lack of resources. The complexity of still keeping the current system going is just too daunting. And actually going in and adapting to a new organization where there's a lot of the security measures are built in and transferred over to Google, as was mentioned earlier, you're inheriting a lot of the best practices and allowing it to be managed by somebody else who has a complete visibility and protection of your overall ecosystem. So I will just say Google is not only adherence to NIST 853, but their adherence to most of the cybersecurity frameworks that are out there around the world. And they have a complete mappings, and they have audits associated with that. And so you inherit that as you bring it into your own ecosystem. So just be aware of that and why this is sort of important, because the reality is you're allowing all of the hard work that somebody else has done to now be yours. But one thing we do see is this will never work unless you have leadership buy-in and support, right? This focus on getting stuff done, make sure it gets funded, make sure things are done. But I want to really kind of call that out and say, this is something that most organizations or large organizations are doing. And we just wanted to just make sure that people are aware of this, because it's really key. But, you know, training and awareness and testing and having a continuous improvement mindset in your culture is absolutely key. And it's great because it was mentioned earlier today, right, about the workspace migration and how that worked and so forth. Even though it wasn't really tied to cybersecurity, it was one of the key goals, key requirements in the environment. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of put this out there for folks. You're going to get access to these slides down the road, but it's really important to understand this and take a look at what does this mean to have a cybersecurity framework in my organization. Highly regulated entities, which we see in financial sector, we see this in healthcare, and we see this in the government space, basically are generally forced to adhere to a standard. Now, what level of enforcement, what level of budget obviously differs, but I want to be, I want to kind of highlight that this is something, Dido, again, we've done this work for Workspace, but we do help companies in this particular journey. And we just wanted to kind of call it out that it really is a checklist compliance approach. Can we go to the next slide? And really kind of focus in on the fact that, these are adaptable frameworks. You don't have to do everything exactly as they stated. You have to basically have an answer to their checklist. If you look at what is in there, there's about 360 controls across all of those, I think it was 16 sub-elements or groupings that were out there. In total, there's about 1,600 questions that they ask you. What are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? What are you doing for this? And you have to basically explain yourself. You have to do that. And a lot of them, again, if you use third-party tools or so forth, you ask Google, can you give me your answer for these? Because in reality, 1,000 of them are answered by Google. And then you basically address the ones that are unique to your people and processes that make your organization yours. And this is something I want to be clear, and that this is something you should be asking for when you vet a vendor and say, please show me your compliance to a cybersecurity vendor, to these solutions. Why? Because you're doing your due diligence of saying, okay, this is the part Google or Microsoft or SAP, they're doing this, they're demonstrating that they have these capabilities. I don't have to do this anymore. These are the ones that are relegated to me to make sure that these policies, these processes, these people are adhering to these particular aspects. So, as threats are getting more sophisticated, basically what we're saying is there needs to be a call to action, right? Don't let perfection get in the way of good enough. A lot of people get, how do I put it? They get in sort of like deer in headlights mode because they see the big picture and they're going, oh my God, this is too much. I can't deal with this and so forth. But the reality is sometimes it's just a couple of small changes and you start on that will get you so far into reducing the amount of threats that you have in your environment. Now, let's be key, right? It's not that this will mitigate all the risk away, but it will at least start you on that journey where you can actually drive that culture, drive that mindset, and start adapting your organization to look at what they're going to do when certain things happen. Because I will mention disasters do strike. And again, disasters are not in the movie type view disaster. We're talking about something that impacts your organization's ability to deliver services. Thank you. Any questions? I realize well, actually, we still have a bit of time. Any questions on this, and then maybe also how it ties back to the previous conversations?
Rich, this is John. But so we've got folks on-premise as well as cloud environments. Is there any different approach to be taken for an on-premise environment versus cloud?
Yes. So let me explain. One of the benefits of going to cloud is you know where all your assets are. I know that sounds kind of weird, but when we assess a number of organizations, we always find that there's always, I won't say always, often there are unauthorized devices that are in place or they don't know about, right? You're walking down the data center and you have this data rack and, okay, who does this belong to? We don't know. It's like you can't do an effective change management to a system unless you know who owns it, who purchased it, why did they purchase it, who's supposed to maintain it, how are you dealing with that? Healthcare is horrible with this, by the way. I'm just going to call it out. They have one of the most stringent regulatory requirements for high trust and HIPAA to protect the privacy of their healthcare data. Yet, because of mergers and acquisitions, because of stuff coming together, oftentimes when you're dealing with on-prem systems, they don't have an accurate picture of what they have, what version is it running, how is it operating. And so this is where I kind of get into, this becomes technical debt. And that's a term used that all your bad habits, your shortcuts that you have done over the last 20 years come back and bite you. And we have at Dido a few hospital groups that are finding that it is cheaper rather than to go back and fix their on-prem, which by the way, you can fix it, go right ahead and do that. But they're actually finding that it's cheaper to migrate to cloud to solve their compliance issues by essentially moving their workloads. And then now everything goes through automation, through change management, through control management, so that nothing happens in the system without there being some level of visibility and control on the ecosystem. Years ago, I can tell you right off the bat, people had brought in wireless access points to their office because the corporate Wi-Fi sucked, and they just bought something up from Best Buy, brought it into the office. It's like, I can't tell you how many violations you're doing there, because it is incredibly easy to hack wireless systems. Just to give you a sort of as a threat. So back when I was at Cisco, one of the capabilities I built, and I was proud of myself at the time, was called network admission control, which was this idea that if you plug yourself into the network would look at your laptop, see if you have all the right software installed, and quarantine you because you're missing an antivirus or something to that effect, and protect your environment. And so we thought this was a great way of having the quote unquote self-defending network that Cisco went out and advertised this sort of approach. Till I had dinner and drinks with a chief architect at Symantec who basically blew my bubble. And he blew my bubble because he told me, Rich, this was 2014, by the way, he's telling me, Rich, our tools don't work. It's like, well, what do you mean they don't work? Well, antiviruses are great at scanning for known signatures, which that means they're out in the wild and they're attacking everyone. Well, the latest threats were people attacking individuals, attacking corporations like General Electric. So rather than trying to build an attack vector that will attack the whole world, we're going to focus on just one player, one organization. And so all I have to do is look up, you can do this right now. You can look up someone on LinkedIn, find somebody local that's a big CEO, big guy at some company, look up the property records, find out their address, right? That's all public information. And then just do a drive-by. What do I mean? They just take your car, drive right in front of their house, and see if you can capture the Wi-Fi signal in their house. And 90% of the time, the software is on Kali Linux today. You can just download it on a separate device, and you can basically penetrate their home Wi-Fi network and get access to all the devices that are connected on their home network. This is why I mentioned that your laptop, your device, just is not secure, because it's connected to an insecure network. And the reality is, if there is a way for someone to come in and installs something onto that device, then that computer then goes back to the corporate headquarters, and a pinhole gets, depending on how well it's secured, the reality is you can get an intrusion that gets created in that particular manner. And again, that's why I'm just saying, with Google and the workspace solution, your data doesn't live on your computer anymore. Your computer could be filthy. I don't care, right? The reality is you're creating an air gap between that computer and the cloud, and you're actually working through a window, through your browser or your Chromebook or whatever. You're engaging with the data that's living in the cloud, not the other way around. Because if you're just managing and pushing files from one place to another, how many times you've heard of macros, attacks from an Excel spreadsheet or a Word document or something like that? I mean, it's just impossible to just keep up with everything. And you can do everything right and it still get infected. And then you run some piece of software that tells you you're infected. And how do you know that piece of software isn't trying to infect? Like, in the end, what ends up happening is most Windows systems that are out there are bricks, right? People buy an environment and they're locked out. They can't have the admin. They can't install any software that isn't their own. They're forced to engage with it just based on the way it is. And even then, people are using these little Java scriptlets and finding different attack vectors into your ecosystem to run and bypass the security measures. And so this is why we're basically saying, Chrome, what's nice about it is that all of the applications that are installed go through a Google verification process, and an administrator can lock everything down and say, hey, only these apps can run. It is not something you could install very easily software. But look, people have iPhones or Google Play or like your things. I'm very careful what apps I install on my phone. People say, oh, you can control it. They have visibility or tracking my location or access to other files. It's like, do you trust that? I mean, there's all these apps that are out there and there are security vulnerabilities in there. Best practice is to recognize that your laptop, your cell phone, all your devices are likely hacked. And I'm just saying, so how do you deal with the world knowing that? And part of it is reduce the risk by being very careful what you install on your devices. But even with that, what happens when something is there? Having a solution that isn't relegated or dependent on your device being secure is a huge, like for a CISO, it takes a lot of risk off my mind. Now, we have a policy at Dido, you're not allowed to download your software onto your laptop. In other words, your Google documents, your documents must reside in the cloud. Customer documents must reside in the cloud. So we put a policy in there, and I understand, but Google allows you to work offline in documents. It allows you to do certain things, and that security measure comes with you into your environment. But the real world, if you go into the Microsoft ecosystem, you have to put all these protections around it. That just becomes very, very difficult to prove that you have not been breached, because it's just crazy out there in terms of the threats that are there. And I apologize if I scared on this, but people don't understand. Just like I have arguments with my daughter because she wants to run certain apps on her phone, and I'm like, and I'm saying no, and she's like, I have parental controls on that, and it's a losing battle. Okay, I'm just telling you, it really is. But people need to understand that there are risks, especially free apps. If they're free, you're the product. They're capturing information from you. They're doing something, whether it's Facebook, Snapchat. I mean, I'm just pointing it out, but you download a really sophisticated video game on your phone. Well, what are they doing with, like, no one's going to spend millions of dollars building an application unless they're doing something with the fact that they've installed themselves on your phone. So just be aware of that. And being aware is really part of the criticality, but then how do you solve for that is recognition that, okay, this is the world I'm in, not the one I want to be in, but the one that I'm really in. How do I mitigate the risk of being in that ecosystem? And cybersecurity frameworks, again, as you go through the checklist, depending on the technology, the people, the processes, and the structure you will have a good set of answers to answer there, or ask yourself, oh, I'm at risk, I need to fix this.
One other question.
Oh yeah, I just I put a comment in the chat there. Just if anybody, we talked about having all your assets in one place and being able to monitor for compliance. If you're using Google Cloud, we have this concept of Security Command Center, which is a tool that we're automatically scanning your environment, looking for vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, and so on, and we can report that against the compliance matrix to see this is where you are. So Richard, you talked about the NIST 153. Like, here's where you are for the controls that you manage, where you're not hitting that. Here's your score, right? And here's
It helps because it doesn't do everything, but it addresses a number of those control layers from the technology perspective and says, this is what you're doing here, but you still have to deal with awareness training, right? Google can't say when was the last time you had a knowledge session and did you capture the names? And well, it could, right? But not Google Cloud, not Security Command Center Premium. So point is that you want to build these into your sort of DNA, into your culture, and be aware of the risk around you is really key. And this is why I'm just pointing this out. Like, my knowledge is that we are constantly being bombarded and data is being extracted out of us, whether directly or indirectly. And it could just be that someone's tracking my cell phone and tracking me and tracking my name, and they may not have access to other information, but they may know some info about me based on the fact that I installed an app on my cell phone. And they're selling that data or they're monetizing it. However they do it, there is a business somewhere there. And so just be aware of that and understand that there's a risk there, and how could that risk translate back from an operations perspective? Because BYOD, which is bring your own device, is popular. It's there. People want to use their own computers. They want to use their own cell phones to engage with your resources. And the thing is, they're more effective if you allow them to do that. So from a business operations perspective, giving that flexibility, or give them a cell phone, but that's costly, right? Why would you, do you have two cell phones, a business one and a personal one? Or do you say, hey, you can access our environment? But with Workspace, it's reasonably safe to run in with the Google apps on your iPhone, on your devices, and then still know that it's there. And then you also have remote wipe capabilities. This is something we do at Dido. It's actually as a feature for our employees, is that one, we don't have access to the data, we don't want to see it, but as an employee, we can do a remote wipe of yours if you allow it through Google. Because if you lose your phone or it gets lost or stolen or whatever, you may have data in there that, okay, they ain't work data, but we're shutting down that phone and that access to the information. But being able to remote wipe the entire phone that was stolen has some value. And so that's why we're just calling it out, is that can be, that device management capability is something that's really big. It's part of Zero Trust. It's also part of context-aware management, so that you could also say, hey, that device has to be in the United States to have access to my employer information. And that's something you can do easily. And you can pre-approve a certain phone and say that phone is only good if it's in the US physically and within certain boundaries or geolocations. And you can provide some sort of granular control on how employees can engage with the data that's in the cloud. So it's not just their username and password and their MFA, but now it's like, that phone has been pre-approved. Why? Because we can remote wipe it. We can do other things. There's a lot of value that comes to knowing that, stuff will happen. The question is, what will you do when that situation occurs? In the financial sector, if you're not allowed to, like, they're very big on, this device is the only way you have access to my information. And by the way, you could also have different set of access. You're saying your personal phone could have access to these resources, but not other resources, so that you can have granular, this is part of Zero Trust. You can say, with these services are allowed by cell phone, and only these services must have something like a Chromebook or a secure device to gain access to some additional security tools to discriminate between, I don't know what the status of that is, so call it gray security versus blue security, which I know I vetted, I know it's good, and I'm going to allow it into my environment. And so you could actually have by Zero Trust, by knowing, okay, he's coming in from here, how am I going to manage that? And so this is part of device management capabilities that are built into Cloud Identity, which is part of Google Workspace.
Awesome. Okay. Any other questions in the last few minutes that we have from the group on either Workspace or cyber questions?
And just while we wait for hands or questions in the chat, I do want to reiterate to Rich's point, we didn't mean to scare anybody, but the point of this is we wanted this to be educational so you understand the threats, the frameworks, the solutions that are on the table and can help. And I just want to reiterate too that Google and DITA, one thing I like about both of our solutions and our partnership together is that we really right size it for the institution we're working with. And I think when it comes to government institutions in particular, we do see that local governments as well as K through 12 institutions are now in the top 5 targets for cyber attackers. So it's, it's increasingly prevalent, and it doesn't matter if you're, Los Angeles or Kenosha, we're seeing it across the board. So we are here to help. Again, our information is in the chat. And if you are looking to, increase the security posture of your environments, we'd certainly be open to a conversation about that. And again, creating the solution that's right for you.